loved her children. And Mike Hyatt, I don't even, I have no comment on that. I don't think I ever suspected that either.
Do you remember telling Detective Bethel, the mom's married to a guy that's got a lot of trouble with the law? And that was one of my first instincts, was like when the come and go came up and they said that he would walk all nonchalant and everything was normal, like the dude was here or something, because he's got a lot of trouble in his background. So like it came to my mind. It was worth putting down. I don't know if anything is legit.
And that's exactly what I said. It came to my mind and I didn't know if
Okay.
anything was legit. So that's exactly what I just said.
Yeah. And then as that kind of goes on and everything like that, the stuff just starts based upon what Ms. Stauch is telling you, it's not adding up.
Repeat that, please, sir.
As this kind of day goes on and the days are progressing, the things that Ms. Stauch is telling you about your son and where he might be, it's starting to not add up with you.
Yeah, it's starting with the rental car, as we've already addressed, it starts to not add up. Yes,
And then when you see that her car is not at French Elementary, like I said, was kind of, I think what you testified yesterday, that was kind of the pivotal moment for you.
yes, sir.
And then you go down to the police station, you want her to come down as well, and she won't come down to meet you at the sheriff's station.
Just to clarify, she was supposed to be the one to go to the police station. The defendant was.
Yeah.
The first time I went down there, I went in her stead because they asked to bring something to get Gannon's DNA or whatever. And I said, he's my son. I'm going to take it down there and I'm going to,
Okay.
lead the charge, if you will, whatever. And then, so I went down there and that's when the first interview took place,
Okay.
just to clarify.
And then after that, though, you come back again, and it's my understanding you were trying to get her to come down, even on that second interview, come down to the police station to be re-interviewed, or the sheriff's station.
When you say re-interviewed, you mean me or the
Her.
defendant? I don't know when she was interviewed the first time or at all. I just know I went twice. The first time, as I indicated, when she was supposed to go, the defendant was supposed to go. The
Yeah.
second time, that evening was after I had discovered the defendant's car was not where she claimed it to have been.
And then her family, she leaves the house. Initially, she doesn't take all her stuff, but she just goes to a hotel, correct?
Ms. Chalina, I have no clue where she
Okay.
went.
She doesn't, she's no longer coming to your house.
After that would have been, let me see if I can get these dates right. The 27th was Monday. I think this would have been Wednesday, the 29th. After she left, I don't remember her coming back until she came to get her stuff.
Okay. And how many days after that did she come to get her stuff?
I don't remember a specific date.
Okay. But I mean, it's in that first week though.
I don't remember a specific date, Mr. Chalini. If
Okay,
you have
that's
it, then I don't know.
No, that's fine. And she had family members that were helping her move out.
We did have a few, yes.
Okay. And then you don't ever, until, I think what you said, after that point, you don't see her from then, until court.
I don't believe I saw her again after she left, after she got her stuff, that within that first week, whatever the date was, until she showed up for the first court hearing after she was arrested, the defendant, that is.
Now, between then and then, I think the first pre-recorded phone call we heard was on February 13th. Had you been in communication with her?
To some degree, yes.
Was it primary text messages, phone calls?
I think it was just a mix of emails, text, phone calls. I don't remember specifically. I know there was a wide range of methods.
And at least, I mean, would it be fair to say by the time that you're doing these phone calls with her, I mean, you're convinced at that point in time she's the person responsible for your son being missing?
At minimum, a person of interest, if you will, but
Yeah.
yeah, I had a high suspicion she was responsible.
I mean, and part of that is because, I mean, one, what she was telling you things that weren't true about leaving the car there. So that was the first thing that really shifted, correct?
When you say because, I'd rather tell you
Oh.
the because, but yes, that was one of the first things was that really put her as a person of interest in my mind, and I've said that repeatedly.
Absolutely. And then she goes from saying that Gannon never came home to like a couple days later saying Eduardo was down there and raped me and took Gannon at gunpoint.
No, before she left the house, the
Oh.
defendant told me the first rape story. We covered that yesterday.
Okay, and sorry, thank you for clarifying that. So
Yes, sir.
she's still in the house with you when she comes up, changes from he just doesn't come home to, um, to this Eduardo rape story.
Yeah, I don't remember when the specific name Eduardo was given by the defendant, but the first rape story would have been Wednesday morning in the bed, in a master bedroom, as I testified to yesterday.
And then you're aware that she goes down to the sheriff's statement and does an interview about the rape story.
I believe that was later that morning or early afternoon. I don't know specifically when she got there.
Okay, I mean, and at that point, I mean, it's fair to say now, I mean, whatever suspicions, I mean, your suspicions have become more heightened at that point about her involvement. When it goes from he doesn't come home to this seemingly ridiculous story.
Yeah, and I've been pretty clear since,
Yeah.
from the point of not finding her car where the defendant said it was, from that point forward, everything just compounded and my suspicions just got worse and worse against the defendant.
Absolutely. And what you know of her, I think you've said this to a couple people, I mean, she's an intelligent person.
Do you have record of me saying that to
I
someone?
do. Sorry, I've got a lot of transcripts here. We're indicating that she had a stacked education.
Once again, do you have that
Okay.
somewhere?
Yeah, this was an interview with Detective Bethel. I mean, you may go ahead. Green highlighted with the little.
So that was the second one. Do you have?
That I just go with that one. But you
Okay.
indicated that she had a stacked education.
Yeah.
Okay.
Obviously I did.
You may go ahead. So was it that Wednesday then after she goes down to the sheriff's station that then she doesn't come home at that point?
So I don't know where so.
Okay, she
That
left
day,
that morning.
she left sometime Wednesday, middle of the day. I don't know specifically when.
Okay.
Detective Riley was at the house. I heard the conversation between them two. She left with the intent to follow him downtown to the sheriff's station. I don't know where she went from there.
Did she ever come back home after that other than to get her stuff?
Not while I was there. I never witnessed her coming back home after that.
And then in February, that's when, February 13th, was that the first pretext phone call?
I believe so.
And where were these phone calls occurring at?
At the FBI office downtown.
Okay. And was this something, had you communicated with her that you wanted to talk to her on that date, or how did they know like she was going to be calling at this point in time?
Who is they?
The FBI.
The FBI. Leading up to that point, there was some attempts at communicating more thoroughly with the defendant.
Yeah.
The defendant reached out to me and said, hey, we would need to talk, as you heard in some of the phone calls.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I believe as of that, like I said this morning, I tried to keep her on the hook, if you will.
No, absolutely.
Through messages. And then, all of those would have been planned to some degree. So I could be there with the FBI agents and the sheriff's office agents.
And they had kind of, or there was a plan. I mean, you were trying to get as much information out of her as you could.
Me or the
Both
authorities?
you and the FBI.
I can't speak to what their plan or their intent was. My intent was to find my son, period.
Absolutely. And I think you said before when you were, Mr. Allen was questioning, a lot of the things you were saying to her was to try to keep her talking, try to get any type of information, that you can about where your son is.
Absolutely.
And trying, hope against hope to bring him home safely at this point.
Yes, sir.
And if not, then find out what had happened and hold somebody accountable.
My intent was never in that setting to hold somebody accountable. I wanted my son and I wanted to wrap my arms around him. That's it.
Absolutely. And it appeared, and maybe I'm wrong. So we had the one phone call that occurred on the 13th, and then all the other phone calls, if I'm not mistaken, occurred on February 14th.
The ones that I testified about this morning, I think those were all February 13th and 14th.
And how, just for my clarification, how long of a gap was there between each of the phone calls? Do you remember?
I don't, but I think Mr. Allen detailed that when he said phone call on this date at this time.
What was there, just as far as your recollection, was there a long gap? Were you guys sitting around for like hours waiting in between calls, or were they fairly quick succession between each other?
Mr. Lee, I don't remember. That was a grueling time period in my life to sit there and have to keep my cool.
Absolutely.
Talking to her when I had a strong suspicion she had all the information. So I can't attest to that, Mr.
Okay.
Lee.
I mean, and it's clear at least that you appear on February 13th to keep your cool very well. It appears, and if I'm wrong on this, your patience on February 14th starts to grow thin. Would that be fair to say? Let me rephrase.
Yes, thank you.
You become more and more frustrated with the cockamamie story she's telling you on February 14th.
I don't know if, I think I'm frustrated, period.
Absolutely.
I think I'm at the end of my rope, period. But I did a good job keeping my cool. And if you listen to one of the phone calls, I was a little bit more aggressive verbally. And in a later phone call, I was more patient and letting her give me information. So more calculated than frustrated, Mr.
Okay,
Dean.
so that was part of this. You're trying different tactics to try to get information. Would that be fair?
I'm doing the best I can to find information about my son.
And was there frustration by the fact that she keeps changing these stories with no consistency between them? And I think you referred to them, these are garbage stories.
Yeah, it was very frustrating.
And that they don't make any sense. At one point in time, she says it's Eduardo, and then another point in time she says Quincy Brown's, some type of paperwork fell out of his pants on that date, and that's how she knows he's Quincy Brown. I mean, none of this stuff, they were ridiculous.
Is that
I'm asking you, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I said, and you heard me say it. They're garbage stories is what you quoted me as saying.
And even on that, the first one, the one that we heard yesterday, on that phone call that she had yesterday, she's trying very hard to convince you that she didn't have anything to do when somebody had kidnapped Gannon and had taken him somewhere, and she's trying to help It appears that is her goal as to what she's telling you.
Mr. Delaney, I'm not going to speak to her goals or her intent, what was going through her mind at that point.
She wasn't at that point in time trying to indicate anything, mental health or anything like that. That was phone call. She's not telling you, hey, I'm crazy on the 13th, correct?
I don't believe she said that in any of those phone calls.
But in some of those phone calls, she does make some statements. And I'm going on to the February 13th phone call. She indicates at one point in time when she's talking to you, I have completely parts of the information and not part of the information.
Is that, are you quoting that? Could you say that again?
She told you that she has part of the information, but she doesn't have part of the information.
Okay.
She talks to you about that night after night, I dreamed of different things that have added detail to this.
Okay.
She tells you that at some point she blacked out.
Are you quoting?
Yes.
Okay, then I have no reason to deny her saying that, yes.
At one point, she says, I sit back and remember it, like play it in my mind, play it in my head again, play it in my head again, play it in my head again.
Okay.
She says, when I woke up and like out of the state of confusion, I was going crazy.
Okay.
She tells you all of it was a blur in and out, try to figure it out. I got up at one point and hoped it was a dream.
Okay.
And then on that next phone call that occurred on the 14th, she's talking to you and she indicates you're going back and forth. I think it was the second to last phone call that you had with her. You guys are going kind of back and forth. And at one point, you're trying to figure out where Gannon is. She says, Tesha doesn't know where Gannon is.
I don't remember her saying that, but
Okay.
if you want to show me that, you don't have to, but I don't remember her saying that.
Okay. It's on the recording they have.
Okay.
As far as, and now I'm going to kind of shift to more like just general things of your relationship with Miss Stauch. You've indicated that at some point, and sometimes with her, it's like you're living on a roller coaster. She can be up and down.
Did I say that to someone?
Yeah, again, this is a Detective Bethel. Sometimes you just got to kind of stay with her and don't ride the roller coaster. Or if you disagree with her, it becomes like a roller coaster.
Sure.
Okay. You talked about her with the kids, and you've indicated that, and this would be later in March, you did another interview and you did this with the FBI, March 6th, 2020. You remember doing an interview with the FBI then?
I did multiple interviews, so I might
Yeah.
need to see that one, Mr. Tellini.
Okay. You indicated to them that sometimes it was a little strange. Sometimes she could be really great with the kids, doing everything with them. And then you'd have weeks where she would act like she didn't want anything to do with them.
You mind if I take a look at that?
Yeah,
I don't remember that, doing an interview that time frame.
I may approach. You may.
Hold on, this says February 9th. It says interview of Albert Stauch, February 9th. You indicated March 9th.
That's because the first page has the 3.
Okay.
So you're correct. So February 9th, so that's my fault.
Thank you.
I think that was, I'm going to blame that on the FBI because on the first page of that interview, they have 3-9. But you're correct. So on
Can we
February,
clarify what the date actually is of the
it
interview?
is, you were correct. It is February
February.
9th. You did that interview with the FBI. Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
But that point in time, you told them that some point she would be really great with the kids, and then other times she wouldn't want it. She wouldn't.
Yes, sir, absolutely.
You also, in that interview, I think it was that Monday with Detective Riley, same type of thing. Like 1 minute, considering these moments of trust moments, like right now, I say, you should be all in, helping the kids, teach, doing homework, cooking, feeding and stuff. And then there'd be days and week, like it's like the kids were left to fend for themselves.
What Monday are you referencing?
The Monday where you had, not the Monday, this would have been Tuesday, when you had the interview with Detective Riley, back, so January 28th.
Okay. So this was the interview at
With
the
detec-
sheriff's office?
Yes, with Detective Riley.
Okay.
And you were telling him, describing how Ms. Stauch was with the kids, and you indicate that there are moments and times when she's really good, she's helping the kids, doing everything like that, and then other times where it appears like she's just checked out.
Yes, sir.
You indicated that sometimes her and Layden seemed to work together to try to get you.
Yeah, probably in jest, but
Okay.
yeah.
And then other times they appeared to be at each other's throats.
Who's they?
Ms. Stauch and Layden.
Lena? If I said that.
Not Lena, Layden.
Landon?
Landon, I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah,
Landon. I
okay,
apologize.
then I take back what I just said, yeah, can you start over with the
Okay.
Landon, because I thought you said Lena.
And, yeah, Landon, with your first ex-wife, you indicated that sometimes her and Ms. Stauch would work together like they were out to try to get you, and other times they were at their throats constantly.
Yes, sir.
You indicated, and again, if I'm jumping back and forth, that Ms. Stauch would take lots of trips out of the blue and you didn't know where she got the money to do it.
Yes, sir.
You indicated, when you talked to the district attorney's investigator, that sometimes Ms. Stauch likes to refer to herself as Taylor.
Yes, sir.
She had, let me jump back a little bit and we're almost done, sir.
Take your time, Mr. Trelani.
Okay, thank you. When you guys first started, when you and Ms. Stauch first started dating and the relationship was going well, she had talked to you about the abuse she suffered growing up.
She mentioned that there was something with one of her stepfathers. I think his name would have been Mr. Lowry. And that I don't remember it being a pattern of abuse, but some isolated events is the way she described it to me. And she eventually moved out of that house and back with her grandparents in North Carolina.
Okay, and that was James Lowry, do you remember?
I don't know his first name. I just remember the last name Lowry.
And I don't want to get into this, but that was kind of a bond that you got, not a bond, but that was, you had in your family growing up, and I want to go into it, but not with you, but trauma growing up. And so that was something that, a basis that you guys could talk about initially in the relationship.
We discussed it. I don't know if it's a foundational basis like you're describing it, but.
She had issues maintaining steady employment.
I think that's a misrepresentation of what happened, but she.
Well, I mean, I think you indicated that she had like 8 jobs in 3 years.
Right, and she intentionally left those jobs. It
Okay.
wasn't, she had trouble keeping employment. She intentionally left those jobs.
Okay, but she had a lot of different jobs in a short period of time.
Yes, sir.
You're aware of in the late fall of 2019, she was having mental health issues.
I'm not aware of that.
Are you aware that she was, well, you guys have the same insurance, correct?
Yes, sir.
Are you aware that she was seeing a Dr. Rhonda Niederhauser at Fort Carson?
We did, so let me clarify, we did have the same insurance while myself and the defendant were married, obviously no longer do. But yes, I went with her on one occasion to see Dr. Niederhauser. Well, to Fort Carson. I did not go back into the room with her. With the defendant, I stayed in the lobby, but I was with her on that visit.
And that and actually for most of your guys' relationship, she had been prescribed lorazepam.
I don't know for sure if most of our relationship, I know she at some point saw somebody for anxiety and got a prescription for something. That's all I remember, Mr. Tellini.
Are you aware that Dr. Niederhauser advised her to quit her job because her mental health issues were becoming so severe?
I am not aware of that.
Okay. But you are, to your knowledge, if you know, how often seeing Dr. Niederhauser?
Same answer I already gave. I know that she went once, and that was the one time that I went with her. That's all I can attest to, Mr. Tellini.
When you had, again, I'm jumping back to when you had that interview with Detective Riley. At that point in time, were you having concerns about Ms. Stauch and her involvement? When you had the interview with Detective Riley?
And her involvement in what, Mr. Tellini?
In the disappearance of your son?
Yeah, we've already, let's ask your question again, please, so I can.
When you interviewed with Detective Riley that first time, were you having concerns about her involvement?
So just to be clear, the first time by myself or?
First time by yourself?
Yeah, I did have some concerns.
And you've indicated that you don't think that she had any mental health issues?
No,
at all?
sir. No, I did indicate that I don't think she had any mental
Okay.
health issues.
Do you remember at that point in time, telling Detective Riley, I hope that it doesn't come to that, but if you put her daughter on the hot seat, she'll say, I love my mom. You know, I wouldn't do anything without my mom, but she's freaking nuts, crazy.
So that was drawn, I remember saying that or something to that point.
Okay.
Yeah,
So you told the detective that she's crazy.
Mr. Tellini, would you quote what you just quoted to me?
Or you told the detective that Harley would say that her mom is freaking nuts, crazy.
That's what I said.
Okay. No further questions.
Redirect, Mr. Allen.
There were some questions, Mr. Stauch, about the defendant being a good softball player. Do you remember those?
Yes, sir.
Does softball have rules?
Absolutely.
Did the defendant know how to follow those rules?
Absolutely.
Did she know how to play the game?
Very well.
Did she know how to use specific techniques and strategies in playing softball?
I would say her being a coach at the high school softball level would indicate all of those things are yes.
You jumped to my next question.
Yeah.
Did she also go through efforts to teach other people how to play the
Absolutely.
all the rules of softball?
Yes, sir.
Is that an indication that she knew the difference between right and wrong?
Yes, sir.
You were asked at the very beginning too about when you got custody of your kiddos, Gannon and Lena, that it was a safer environment with the defendant than with Landon. Do you remember those questions?
Yes, sir.
Would you have thought that if the defendant had severe mental health disease or defect?
Absolutely not.
Did she have a severe mental health disease or defect back then?
No, sir.
You were asked in different points of the cross-examination about your interviews with Detective Riley. And I want to be a little bit more of a timeline here. Do you remember having an interview with Detective Riley and other people at Starbucks, and that being your first contact with law enforcement in this case in person?
Yes, sir.
And then you went to the El Paso County Sheriff's Office to deliver, I think you said some stuff for DNA. What did you deliver?
I remember there being a toothbrush and maybe, I don't remember specifically, but some sort of article of clothing, a shoe or something that would have his, it wasn't spoken to me that way, but I assumed it was for DNA purposes.
And then I think you said that you had an interview at the end of that. When you dropped the stuff off, then you did an interview.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you remember what day that was?
That would have been Tuesday, January 28th, 2020.
The Starbucks thing, when did that occur? Was that also Tuesday, January?
Tuesday, earlier in the day.
Okay. And then you had a third interview in person at the sheriff's office when you came back. What day was that?
Later in the evening, Tuesday, January 28th, 2020.
You were asked about specifically shown a specific page of the interview, the first one at Starbucks, where Mr. Tellini was asking you about when you got Gannon into counseling.
Yes.
And there was some disagreement between you and Mr. Tellini about when that counseling may have started or when you said that the counseling had started. Who is Dr. Burtek?
She was I don't know specifically, but she was some sort of family health counselor that Gannon got assigned to at Fort Carson.
So could you have signed Gannon up for counseling at Fort Carson before you got to Colorado?
No, sir.
So did that occur after you got to Colorado?
Yes, sir.
Which was in when?
I got here February 15th or thereabouts, 2019.
When you were having that first contact with Detective Riley at Starbucks, did you have a lot on your mind?
Absolutely.
The information that you had on your mind as it relates to Gannon being missing, where were you getting that information from that initial period of time?
Everything was coming from the defendant.
At that time, did you have any reason to necessarily disbelieve her that Gannon had left and not come home?
No, sir, not at that time.
And did that change over time?
Yes, sir.
Did that change over time because of the defendant's specific actions?
Yes, sir.
You were asked about you having conversations with your mother about, and Mr. Tellini said that your mother told you that she had concerns about the defendant's mental health.
That's what Mr. Tellini said, yes.
Do you remember that?
I don't remember her diagnosing the defendant based on hearsay. I remember having conversations about, the defendant's anxiety and how that affects our relationship, yes.
In your mind, did the defendant have anxiety?
I'm not a medical professional, but I would say she had some form of it. She had, some anxiety here and there about different things.
Even if she had that anxiety in your lay opinion, was she able to function?
Absolutely.
Could she make a meal?
Absolutely.
Could she make a Denver omelet if she wanted to?
Maybe get some Chick-fil-A sandwiches, but yeah.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Could she scramble eggs?
She could, yes.
Put some cheese on the eggs?
Yes, sir.
Without burning herself?
Yes, sir.
What about cut up vegetables?
Yes, sir.
Could she do that without cutting herself?
Yes, sir.
Did she ever run out in the street yelling, screaming naked?
Not that I remember, no, sir.
You were asked about the rental car and about that being odd. Do you remember that in the cross-examination?
Yes, sir.
Did that appear to you in your mind to be a way of manipulating what was happening with the investigation?
It's hard for me to say. Once again, as you said already, that was a time period when I was just way down with worry. the reason she gave, I think we've talked about already, I'm not sure, but was about the mileage on her lease. And so she had to get a rental car, which was something the defendant had said repeatedly over time. So looking back, I can make an assessment, but in the moment, it was just a ridiculous thing that I just blew past. I was more worried about getting out there and doing what we could to find Gannon.
Well, if, in your mind, if your kid is missing, are you worried about the miles you're putting on your car?
And I believe I've said that already. No, there's nothing more important than finding that little boy.
And so, the fact that her car was hidden somewhere, was that, when you put two and two together, was that a form in your mind of her manipulating the investigation?
Absolutely. That's why I freaked out and went back down to do another interview with the sheriff's office.
You were asked about the, again, going back to the Starbucks interview with Mark Riley, the first one on January 28th, about, you expressing some concerns about Landon's ex-husband, Mike Hyatt. You
Yes,
remember that?
Yes, sir.
And talking about the trouble that he had in his background.
Yes, sir.
Again, at that time, were you operating on limited information?
Yes, sir.
Were you racking your brain trying to figure out what might have happened with Gannon?
Yes, sir. I was just going through every possible, any variable, anything possible that would have led us closer to him.
Would you characterize that as you were going through every known variable in your mind and then trying to cross them off to see whether there was any connection to Gannon being missing?
Yeah, in conjunction with variables and information I was being fed from the defendant as well.
Okay. You did 3 interviews on January 28th,
Yes, sir.
1 at Starbucks and then 2 at the sheriff's office later that day.
Yes, sir.
Did it seem odd to you that the defendant was resisting going to the sheriff's office and giving an interview?
Yes, sir.
Why?
Once again, if the feelings are true and honest about we need to work together to find Gannon, as the defendant said repeatedly, what is there to hide from? Why would you not go down there? What is keeping you, the defendant, from coming down there?
Okay. And did that appear in your mind to be a conscious decision the defendant was making to resist going to the sheriff's office and give an interview?
Absolutely.
You talked about getting text messages and phone calls during this time that these recorded phone calls were happening.
Yes, sir.
Did the defendant change I guess, the source of those phone calls over time? And let me be more clear. You obviously gave us earlier her specific phone number that you knew you had with her at AT&T.
Yes, sir.
Did you start getting phone calls and texts from her that weren't from necessarily AT&T, the account that you knew about?
Yes, sir. I got phone calls and text messages from multiple different phone numbers, and emails started coming from her email, which to me indicated it was no longer. I also got messages from her iCloud, is what I'm trying to say. So, which indicated me she no longer had her normal phone and she was using some alternate method of communication, if that makes sense.
It does. And so, again, did that indicate to you more conscious decision-making that she was still able to communicate with you, even though her phone might have been seized by law enforcement?
Yes, sir.
Able to navigate that sort of framework of figuring out other ways to text you or call you?
Yes, sir.
You were asked about these phone calls that we've heard and the stories that the defendant was giving you, and the way Mr. Tellini characterized them was that there was no consistency in the stories. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir.
Were there in fact actually consistencies with her stories and what was happening with the investigation?
Yes, sir. For instance, once the search shifted to, say, northern El Paso, Douglas County area on that County Line Road area that the defendant indicated in the phone calls, I felt like she had to place herself there somehow, and that's what she did in that phone call.
Are you suggesting in your mind that that was a way for her to explain away why her GPS would show her there?
Yes, sir.
Sustained. Jury will disregard the answer.
She also gave you a description of blood being in the garage and in Gannon's room.
Yes, sir.
Are you aware that there was blood found in the garage and in his bedroom?
Yes, sir.
And then, as it relates to that El Paso County, Douglas County line, so up north, were you aware that there was a board with Gannon's blood and DNA found on it up in that area?
I was made aware of that, yes, sir.
You got into some questions about your relationship with the defendant, and you were specifically asked about a statement you made about the relationship between the two of you was like riding a roller coaster. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir.
Why was it like riding a roller coaster?
I think that's the normal ebb and flow of many relationships. I don't think that's uncommon. We had our ups and downs in our relationship. That's what that indicated.
Well, let me ask you more specifically, based on your belief that she would manipulate you sometimes, did that add to the effect of riding a roller coaster
Yeah, that would have been the extreme lows in our relationship. Yes, sir.
when she would manipulate you?
Yes, sir.
Was it common for her to manipulate you?
Yes, sir.
You were asked about sometimes she would be great and sometimes not. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir.
When the sometimes not period of time, what was that a result of?
Oftentimes, a result of that manipulation that we just discussed, or lies or mistruths the defendant would tell that I would have to sort through, as you heard me do in these phone calls, that I have to sort through these lies and get to the truth.
Was it ever those lows, the sometimes not part, were those ever a result of her suffering from a severe mental illness or disease?
No, sir.
Ever?
No, sir.
You were asked about the defendant referring to herself as Taylor. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir.
Tell the jury about that. What does that mean?
So I believe when I met the defendant, her Facebook profile said Tisha Taylor Harden. And of course, I had questions about that because her middle name is Lynn, I believe, the defendant's middle name. The defendant would always say, always wanted my middle name to be Taylor. I don't like the name Lynn. And that's where I left it at that. So anytime Taylor ever came up, I just, in my mind, referred back to that's what she preferred her name to be.
Well, did she ever use the name Taylor and start acting crazy?
No, sir.
Did she ever use the name Taylor and start talking in other languages?
No, sir.
Did she ever use the name Taylor and start having other personalities?
No, sir.
Was Taylor ever associated with her having a severe mental illness or disease or defect?
No, sir.
You were asked about the defendant having difficulty maintaining steady employment. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir.
You answered that the defendant intentionally left those jobs.
Yes, sir.
So expand on that for the jury. What do you mean by that?
So, for instance, when we, I think in the tail end of our dating relationship, in the first part of our married relationship, she was working at Myrtle Beach Middle or Elementary School and quit, resigned from that position, causing her to have to seek new employment.
Okay.
And and why that's significant, because I disagreed with the decision. It was what I, outside looking in, a great place of employment for her, and she seemed fine there.
Okay. And then you were asked about Dr. Niederhauser, right? Do you remember that?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Tellini told you that the defendant was being seen for anxiety. You remember that?
Yes, sir.
Did you know whether she was being seen for anxiety or not?
I did not. Once again, I only accompanied her as far as the waiting room that one visit, and then she went to the back, was seen, and then the defendant, that is, came out, and we went home.
To your knowledge, was the defendant ever seen for a severe mental disease or defect?
No, sir.
And then finally, do you remember the defendant in this investigation, whether she ever told you to not talk to the police?
She did.
How many times?
I don't remember how many times one stands out specifically.
Okay. And then did you try to call her during your second interview?
I believe I did. I'd have to hear or listen to it to confirm, but I think so.
And I'm talking about your interview that you did with Detective Riley at the sheriff's office.
So the first one at the sheriff's office?
Second interview at the sheriff's evening.
So
Let me
the
finish.
third one total?
Yes,
Okay,
let me
that's fine.
finish. The second interview at the sheriff's office, so you're right, it would be the third, but only the second one at the sheriff's office, evening of January 28th.
Yes, sir. I believe I did try to call her. Yes, sir.
Were you able to get a hold of her?
No, sir.
You know why you were not able to get a hold of her?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. That's all I got.
Do any of the jurors have any questions for Mr. Stauch? No? All right. Thank you, sir. You may step down. Prosecution, call your next witness, please.
called make and ponder to the stand, Your Honor.
Mr. Ponder, if you would step forward and raise your right hand, please, sir. Sorry. Actually, yep, up here. Everybody does that. That's okay. Do you swear or affirm the testimony about to give in this man will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Go ahead and have a seat in the witness stand. Please watch your step as you step into the stand. The chair does not move. Everybody does that. The microphone moves, but the chair does not. All right. Mr. Young?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Ponder. How are you doing?
Good, sir. How are you?
Good. You and I never formally met. I'm Dave Young. I talked to you on the phone, I believe. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
And where do you currently reside?
Panama City, Florida, sir.
And did you just fly in from Florida?
Yes, sir. I flew in yesterday.
Did you pack a coat?
I did. I left, it was 80 degrees and got here and it was about 20, so.
I was worried about that, so I'm glad you did that. Mr. Ponder, what's your occupation?
Sir, I'm a bridge inspector for the Florida Department of Transportation. I'm the senior underwater dive team leader.
And how long have you been a bridge inspector?
Roughly 12 years now.
And what do you do as a bridge inspector? I know the title's kind of self-explanatory, but let the jury know what you do.
The short and skinny is basically we, every 2 years, our bridges are required to be inspected. We get a list of bridges each month and we break up into teams and go and inspect those bridges accordingly each month.
Okay. And how often would you inspect certain bridges?
Every 2 years.
Okay. I'm going to take you back to March 17th of 2020. Were you in that role as a bridge inspector back then in Florida?
Yes, sir.
And did you have an opportunity to be inspecting a bridge by the name of Escambia Bridge?
Yes, sir.
And what's the name of that bridge? Did I get that right?
Yes, sir. Just Escambia River Bridge.
Okay. And can you describe this bridge for the jury?
Yes, it's just a concrete bridge, rather long. Basically the environment out there is the river is closer to what we would call the near end of it. And after you get over the river, the bridge actually continues on for a lot further, just due to the marshy area. There's marsh on both sides. It's really inaccessible to any vehicles.
And what city is this bridge close to?
Pensacola, Florida.
And how close is this bridge to the actual ocean, the Gulf of Mexico?
Several miles. As the crow flies, maybe 7 or 8 miles.
And I'm assuming, does the bridge go over the Escambia River?
Yes, sir.
And does the river go into the Gulf of Mexico?
Eventually, the river actually dumps out into Escambia Bay, and then Escambia Bay goes out to the pass and then into the Gulf of Mexico.
And how often, was this another 2 years you would inspect this particular bridge every 2 years?
Yes, sir. Our department for the state of Florida, we inspect bridges every 2 years on interstate systems and any state roads. They have some different stipulations on our county bridges, but our office only handles state highways and the interstate.
So it would have been March of 2018 or approximately then when this bridge was inspected last. Is that fair?
It would have been inspected 2 years prior in the month of March.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be on the exact day.
And approximately how long is this entire bridge that you're inspecting?
I would say roughly 12 to 1,300 feet.
Okay. Is that the only part that covers the river, or does it, when you talk about this marsh area, does a bridge extend over a marsh area as well?
Yes, sir.
And so would that be miles or?
No, that whole area is fairly marshy. There's a set of bridges all the way down through that on that span of US 90. That just happens to be the first bridge on that, starting in that span on that stretch of highway.
So what are you doing when you go out to this particular bridge to inspect it? What are you looking for?
Our job as bridge inspectors to find any kind of defects, any kind of issues that would harm the traveling public. We look for cracks in the deck, cracks in the underside of the deck. As a diver, we look at the piles underwater, look at any kind of cracks and spalls being any kind of missing concrete on those piles or columns. And if it was a steel structure, it'd be the same thing. You'd look for cracks and welds and stuff.
And so do you have someone, particularly on March 17th, 2020, with you as you're doing this inspection?
Yes, sir. We always go out as a team, primarily for safety, but also, we're always on the interstate or on busy roads. So we're always having somebody watch our back when we're taking the notes and watching out for traffic or operating a piece of equipment, if need be, while somebody else is taking notes.
And so do you inspect the surface area of the bridge as well as the side of the bridge and below the bridge? And you indicated you even get in the water and look at the pillars.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. We try to do the best we can to look at 100% of the bridge every inspection.
So could you please tell the jury about March 17, 2020? Did you locate something? Did you locate a suitcase underneath the bridge?
Yes, sir. During that inspection, the particular bridge that we were inspecting requires an underbridge inspection machine. The particular machine allows us to gain access to the underside of the bridge due to the height and over water. As we were inspecting the underside of the bridge and we're coming to the end of it, my partner and I that were in the basket noticed a suitcase towards the end of the bridge, close to, it's kind of laying in a marshy area and a little bit of woods right next to the edge of the bridge. And we just noticed it down there. It was a point of interest when we got down there. We didn't look at it then. We just made a note to come back to it later on.
And who was your partner? What was his name?
Matthew Goins.
And so when you first notice this suitcase, where are you and Mr. Goins at?
When we first noticed it, to back up before getting into the piece of equipment, we also walk across the deck and take soundings at each pier on both sides of the bridge, and that gives us any indication of any settlement or anything that might be failing on the bridge. And that requires dropping down a measuring tape essentially with a weight on it and measuring the height up to the edge of the bridge to the top of the barrier wall. And when we looked over, the suitcase was right next to the edge of a bent where we were taking the measurement. Had it been in the middle of a bent or in the middle of a span, we may have not even noticed it. But because of its location, it was right next to where we dropped our profile tape, is what we call it, to take the measurement. We immediately saw it as soon as we dropped it down.
And so I'm not a Navy guy. When you say deck, are you talking about the road area of the bridge where the vehicles go?
Yes, sir. That's what we call the deck. We take our measurements at the top of the barrier wall. Anybody that's driven over a bridge, the concrete walls on the outside is where we take our measurements from.
And so are you and Mr. Goins looking over the edge of the bridge and you see a suitcase directly down below?
Yes, sir.
What side of the bridge are you on, the eastbound lanes or the westbound lanes?
We're on the eastbound lane and we were on the east or the right side of the structure.
And so you note that there's a suitcase there, but then you go on with the inspection?
Yes, sir.
And tell us about that. Do you go all the way across the bridge and then work your way back, or how does that work?
Well, generally when we're taking a profile, we'll start at what we call the near end, which for our reference is we work from west to east or south to north. In this case, we were working west to east. We started on the right side of the bridge heading east. When we finish that profile, then yes, we do turn back around and we work from east to west back to where we started. And that's when we get into the truck and start our under bridge inspection.
And when you start your under bridge inspection, is that when you get back to the area where the suitcase is?
It wasn't for, no, sir. It wasn't for probably roughly an hour and a half later, maybe even a little bit longer, because when we started the under inspection, we start back at the beginning of the bridge. Okay. And where we found the suitcase was almost at the very end of the bridge.
And this bridge goes east and west, is that right?
Yes, sir.
So you're starting the undercarriage portion on the east side, working your way west. Is that right?
No, sir. We're starting on the, the west end, working towards the east.
Okay. And so what happens when you get back to that area where the suitcase is?
Because of the profile and the, as the bridge, there's the hump in the bridge. When we got towards the end of the structure, the bridge starts to become lower, closer to the ground. And at that point, we didn't need the truck anymore. So we were able to lower the basket down to the ground line and get out, and was going to finish our inspection from there. And that's when we lowered down to the ground, we've remembered that we had seen the suitcase. We finished up our inspection and then went back to the suitcase.
And why did you go back to the suitcase?
Pure curiosity.
Okay. And again, is Mr. Goins with you at this point in time as well?
Yes, sir.
So what happens when you get back to the suitcase?
We got back to the suitcase, and where it was lying at kind of an odd angle, but the handle was towards the underside of the bridge. So I reached out for the handle and immediately noticed it was very, very heavy. And I looked back and remember telling Matt, I said, I don't know what's in this. I said, but it's heavy. I said, and where it was at, it had the possibility of being waterlogged. We didn't know whether it was clothing or something in it. We just noticed that whatever it was probably waterlogged and saturated, just due to how heavy it was.
And I imagine you get a lot of rain in Florida.
Yes, sir.
Do you get a lot of rain in the months of February and March?
We can. March normally is fairly rainy season, but again, where the suitcase was really right at the edge of the marsh, and depending on tide, you don't necessarily have to have a lot of rain for that area to be influenced by tide.
Okay. So you, Mr. Goins, get up to the suitcase. You said it appeared to be heavy. What happened after that?
Because of where it was at, it was very, very marshy and muddy. We, of course, didn't know what was in it, but underneath the bridge where it was at was very flat and sandy. And we kind of like made a decision, let's pull it out of the mud and pull it underneath the bridge where it was flat and sandy, and whatever it was in it, we'll just open it there rather than in the muddy marsh, just sticks and a lot of sticks and stuff there. So we pulled it underneath the bridge.
And what, did you open it?
Yes, sir.
Tell us about that.
I was the first one to unzip it. And before we opened it, as soon as we unzipped it, we immediately noticed the smell. That's what hit us first. I remember looking up at Matt, who's quite a bit taller than me. And I said, Matt, I think there's head in here. And unfortunately, we do come across, sometimes somebody will throw out a litter of puppies or something in a bag, and that's not uncommon. And it smelled, but it was so strong. It was different that day. So I didn't initially open it, and we kind of thought about what we were going to do first. When we finally went ahead and unzipped the rest of it, the smell was so overpowering. We kind of took a step back. And the first thing I remember seeing was just 2 little feet, and that had little football socks on them. The best I remember, I remember there being little socks on them. And before anything else happened, we couldn't really make out what it was. Matt dumped the suitcase over, and of course we initially immediately knew it was a body. But after looking at it, it was, we couldn't tell male or female, boy or girl. We didn't know. A lot of black hair. And then I turned away.
What was the size of this suitcase? Do you remember?
Roughly the size of a checked bag. It wouldn't have been it was too big to be a carry-on, but roughly the size of an older checked bag suitcase.
And was there anything else in the suitcase besides the body?
Lots of blankets. There may have been a pillow or something. I just remember a lot of bedding. bedding in there and blankets. It was kind of, the body was in a fetal position and partially wrapped up. So we couldn't tell a whole lot until we dumped it out. And again, I turned my head,
What did you do after that?
walked away. I immediately said, we went ahead and called the inspection right there. I didn't have my cell phone with me. Matt did at the time. He's a volunteer firefighter and he's dealt with some of this stuff. And I was very thankful to have him there. We immediately dialed 911 and got them on their way. And then I walked up back to the top of the bridge and talked to our truck operator and told him kind of what was going on, that, you know, they were shutting it down. And then just waited for authorities to get there.
Okay. And did members of the Santa Rosa Sheriff's Office eventually show up?
Yes, sir.
And did they interview you and Mr. Goins and process that scene as it was theirs?
Yes, sir.
After we talked on the phone a few weeks ago, did you get an email from me of a Google Earth image of this bridge we've been talking about?
Yes, sir.
And did you yourself mark a red arrow on that Google image as to where the body was found back on March 17th, 2020?
Yes, sir.
If I may approach the witness, Your Honor.
You may.
Mr. Ponder, I'm going to show you People's Exhibit 60 and 69. 61 and 62 are going to be larger. So I'm going to turn these around so you can see them.
Mr. Ponder,
Yes,
if you
sir.
were
Your
looking for a drink of water, there's a water pitcher right there and some cups if you would like some. Be careful when you take the lid off, it comes out fast.
You could just take a moment to look at those photographs and then I'll ask you some questions about them. Okay, have you a chance to do that?
Yes, sir.
Do you recognize those photographs?
Absolutely.
I want to start with People's Exhibit 60. Is People's Exhibit 60 one of the Google Earth images I sent to you?
Yes, sir.
And does that accurately depict the Scambia Bridge, River Bridge, as you knew it back on March 17th, 2020?
Yes, sir.
Do all the photographs that I've given you, including the two ones that are on boards here to your left, accurately depict that bridge as it looked like on March 17th, 2020?
Yes, sir.
You know, at this time, I'd move to admit People's Exhibit 60 through 69.
Defense? Exhibit 60 through 69 will be admitted. Go ahead.
We're going to publish People's Exhibit 60, which is going to be on that TV behind you and on this TV to my left. While we're doing that, I'm going to do a little All right, let's look at People's Exhibit 60 here on the TV screen. Is that the Google Earth image we talked about earlier?
Yes, sir.
Could you just describe the bridge as we're looking at it on this television?
In what way, sir?
Well, let's see, if I can approach on it.
You may.
Used to be a pointer up here. We're old school. So we use these things.
Okay.
Can you just kind of point out the direction of the bridge, if we see the river in this image?
So this is the Escambia River here. Our inspection would start on the west end here and work towards the east. Each of these concrete piers you can see here is what we call vents. And that's where earlier, as I explained, taking the measurements from. So that's each of those that we stopped at is where we take our measurements from, working from the near end or the west, working towards the east end. Also, as I was saying that from the river forward, this area all here is marsh. It is over here really is also. And actually it's just very inaccessible to, except for there's a little service road here. Doesn't really go anywhere, but there's even some boats and stuff still left out here from previous hurricanes that nobody can get to.
And so I'm assuming that's not a populated area,
No, sir.
maybe some wildlife.
Probably lots.
Okay. Are there any lights on this bridge?
I don't believe so. I don't remember. A lot of times the channel is lit. There is a fender system there that would have been lit in the evenings, but I can't remember if there's lights. I want to say there is. It's pretty dark out there, and I'm pretty sure there are light poles on there. Actually, now that I come to think of it, because as we use our machine, we have to come up and over each of those, which is kind of a pain. But yeah, actually, I do believe it is lit, sir.
Okay. And as you're driving across this whole area, the marshy area here, if it's at night, would you know whether or not water would be underneath the bridge or not?
If you were unfamiliar with the area, no. I would say somebody who's driving across it that had never driven across it before and didn't know the area, you wouldn't think you were out of the water or over the water until you got back onto the pavement. Where this is a concrete bridge, you can see where the concrete ends and the pavement begins. You're still actually elevated all the way up to the end of the bridge, elevated off the ground.
And now below that TV there, I put up People's Exhibit 61. Do you recognize that one?
Yes, sir.
And is that the exhibit that you emailed back to me with the red arrow on there?
Yes, sir.
And please tell the jury what we see in that exhibit using that pointer.
The arrow marks approximately where Matt and I found the suitcase that day. It's a little hard to see in that in the picture. But you can kind of see again where the vents are, the lines in the road. And it was one of the measurements right here. The suitcase was roughly just right over the bridge rail, right at the very edge of the marsh there.
And if we can go to People's Exhibit 62 at this time, or 63, I'm sorry. And now we have People's Exhibit 63 up. I'm going to place People's Exhibit 62 on the easel. What do we see here in People's Exhibit 63?
Just a magnified image of the structure.
Is this, again, an indication that you emailed to me with the red arrow saying where you and Mr. Goins found the suitcase?
Yes, sir.
And I want to talk to you about this concrete area, the particular bridge.
Okay.
Is there an area, what I would refer to as a shoulder area to park your vehicle if you get stranded on that bridge?
Yes, sir. The shoulder area would be indicated by the white hash marks on the right side of the bridge.
On that call?
If not, here, this is there
There
we
we
go.
go.
This is going to be your shoulder. the hash marks here would depict where you would be able to pull off the side of the road. Just barely visible, you can see the center line here. This is a two-lane bridge. And so there's almost room there for another lane, but that's just what we call a safety lane to be able to pull over and if you were having car troubles.
So plenty of room to park a vehicle there if you need to.
Yes, sir.
And where this arrow is, and I know you may not be precise, but is that the general area where you and Mr. Goins were taking your measurements when you first saw the suitcase looking over the side of the bridge?
Yes, sir.
It was directly below what you called, was it the barrier?
What we would call a bent, and that's basically just, it's just the space in between each span, where the columns would hold up. Each column is what we call a bent, and it just in between those two is what we call the span.
You can go to People's Exhibit 64 now. What do we see in People's Exhibit 64?
Yep. A picture appears to be looking on that is taken on the westbound bridge, and that is in the safety lane of the westbound, which would also be though on the far end of that structure. And that picture is looking west. Looking west, sir.
And so can you refer back to People's Exhibit 62 on the board here to your left? The one that you saw?
Yes, sir.
And just kind of point out which lanes of travel we're looking at.
That picture's approximately probably a little higher. This direction. Each of these are what we call the bents. That's
So could you have access to get underneath the eastbound lanes by pulling over in this area, walking underneath?
you would have access, but it'd be very difficult to access that area. That's also what we call slope